The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Bloody hell, it feels good to not say Zelda U. This is a huge, huge game, which is very different from any others in the series so far. And of course, as Zelda fans, from the very first moment we saw it, we've been speculating about where exactly it takes place in the timeline. But I believe I've solved it, with a placement after the Wind Waker. But Zeltic, Hyrule was flooded and destroyed at the end of the Wind Waker, blah blah blah. Yeah, that's true, but it didn't stop a certain group from trying to save it. That little group was the Koroks. The Koroks evolved from the Kokiri, likely with help from the Great Deku Tree, in order to survive the Great Flood. When Link meets them in the Wind Waker, he learns that once a year they return to their home in the Forest Haven to collect seeds from the Great Deku Tree, which they then plant around the Great Sea in order to begin draining the waters and letting land once again cover Hyrule. This plan, I believe, must have been successful, because with Breath of the Wild we have a Zelda game that includes Koroks, but is set in a non-flooded Hyrule. Since Koroks evolved from the Kokiri in order to survive their new ocean environment, Breath of the Wild cannot take place before Wind Waker. This leaves one possibility. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild takes place in Hyrule after the Koroks' mission to drain the Great Sea has been accomplished. Rather obvious evidence for this post-flood theory comes from the world itself. Most of it is grassy plains, and the very little structures that are present are worn and crumbled, similar to how they'd look if they'd spent hundreds of years at the bottom of the ocean. All but the grandest structures have been washed away, and even great buildings like the Temple of Time are looking decidedly worse for wear. The world is the most mountainous depiction of Hyrule we've ever seen, which leads me to believe that these peaks of the mountains were once islands in the Great Sea before it was drained. More evidence comes in the form of the Master Sword. It's looking a little rough around the edges. Why would the blade of Evil's Bane look this way, chipped and rusted, if it hadn't spent hundreds of years below the waves? And yeah, I know that at the end of the Wind Waker the Master Sword is pretty firmly rammed into Ganondorf's skull, and in Breath of the Wind it's in its pedestal in the Temple of Time. But what if this is the reason for Ganon's resurgence? In Breath, Ganon is known as the Calamity Ganon. We learn through the Old Man that he's been sealed in Hyrule Castle 100 years prior to the game, after destroying most of Hyrule. Since at the end of the Wind Waker, Link and the King of Hyrule destroy Ganon and flood Hyrule apparently for good, it's plausible that by undoing this and draining Hyrule, the Koroks accidentally made it possible for Ganon to once again terrorize the land. It's also possible that the Master Sword was moved back to its rightful place in the Temple of Time once Hyrule re-emerged from the depths, which unknowingly released Ganon. And even if it was the case that the Zelda team meant for Wind Waker to truly be an end to Ganon, when has this ever been consistent in the series? He always comes back. This placement also explains who the Old Man is. Look closely at his beard, nose and eyebrows and compare them to the same features on King Daphnis No Handsson Hyrule from the Wind Waker. He looks like the same guy, but aged, right? Perhaps the king didn't drown with Hyrule like we thought, but somehow survived and now wonders what was once his land. Another connection between Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild comes with the shrines dotted all over Hyrule. I can't have been the only one to notice this. Blue glow, these markings, challenges from the gods. Don't they remind you of the Wind Waker's Tower of the Gods? Even down to these levitating platforms and robotic enemies. I'm sure that whatever or whoever built the Tower of the Gods is responsible for the creation of these shrines, likely the Sheikah, and they serve the same purpose, to determine the identity of the true hero of Hyrule. What do you guys think about this theory? What do you think of Breath of the Wild? Leave it in the comments below. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.